Hey folks, Rob here bringing another tutorial. This one's going to be convoys and columns. Now this is going to finish off chapter E, and I've been thinking about this one for a bit now. I actually wasn't interested in making this one, except I'm going to be playing a scenario that's going to be involving convoys and columns, so I figured now is as good a time as any. Now the reason why I didn't want to do it is it's a relatively short chapter in chapter E, and number of scenarios that use it are very small. There's, I think, 20, 24 maybe scenarios on Scenario Archive that use it. I found, I think, 12 that use the word column for a search term on Scenario Archive, and maybe a third of those are actually duplicates. So there's not many at all in this scenario world, and there's over 9,000 now, I believe, scenarios of ASL. And if you only have a dozen, maybe 24 that use it, it's not very popular. And as you're going to see, it's only used for entry of units. So once the units enter the board and you break that formation, you're never going to be in it again. So it's just a means of getting onto the board by and large, and therefore it's only delivery of the units. So once it enters play, then it breaks up and you're never going to see it again. So we're just going to quickly cover that, and we're going to be seeing this in action when I play scenario AR1 Broken Column. It's from the Arnhem 2024 scenario pack, celebrating the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Arnhem from last year, and I'm going to be doing that with Castle Calgary probably next weekend, I think, is when we're slated to play that. And let's get into it. All right, so convoy basics. As we said, it's going to be strictly scenario setup, entry of units, and or possibly victory conditions. Depending on those 3 points will determine what happens. Now, it says victory conditions. There's one scenario I remember somebody playing on YouTube, and it said the convoy has to exit the map. I can't remember which one it is, but that's probably the only case that I've seen of a victory condition requiring a unit to exit the map in a convoy formation. But typically, you're going to enter the map, and then the minute you meet certain conditions, you're going to disband, and you're going to carry on with the battle. But what you need to make up a convoy is a series of vehicles. Could be AFVs, could be trucks, combination thereof, and they have to be in a set of adjacent hexes, typically 1 hex wide, a minimum of 2 hexes worth of vehicles, and 1 per hex. Obviously, you can't overstack. You have to have 1 vehicle per hex and a minimum of 2 hexes to make a convoy with no gaps in between. The minute you have a gap in between, you're going to have either 2 convoys or a bunch of individual vehicles. You can only have, if you only have 1 vehicle, it's no longer considered a convoy. You cannot involuntarily create or voluntarily create a convoy in the course of play. So for example, should you have 2 vehicles in this formation sitting here and a 3rd vehicle suddenly, whatever reason, move into the intervening space, you do not suddenly form a convoy and then subject to convoy rules. This just is sheer coincidence, and you act individually for your vehicles. So you can't create one in the course of play. It's only entering a board that you might be in convoy if the SSR or the entry rules say such. You use impulse movement. Now, impulse, you've seen before, it's used for radialist platoon movement, human waves, bonsai charges, that kind of thing. Now, road, typically when something like a Jeep or a crew exposed vehicle uses a road, usually you get half movement rate. That does not apply with a convoy. You're going to pay a full movement rate plus 1. So you're always going to be paying a minimum of 2 per road hex. Now, in addition to that, whenever a vehicle tows an ordnance, usually you're paying 1 extra movement factor. However, in a convoy, you're not paying that. You're always going to have a maximum of 2 per road. You're not going to be paying 3, right? So if you're towing a gun as part of a convoy, you're only ever going to be paying a maximum of 2, not 3. So just bear that in mind. So when this convoy moves down the road, they're only paying 2 per road hex side cross. Just remember that. Again, like we said before, if a gap is created at any point in this movement, say this vehicle gets destroyed, we now have a gap. These vehicles, in this case, there's only 3. We would now have 2 individual vehicles, and they can carry on moving individual. If we were to have, say, let's duplicate these, a 6-vehicle convoy, and this vehicle here is destroyed, we now have a rear convoy and a lead convoy, and they're treated independently. If they had been in mid-move, say, let's bring on a movement counter. What I like to use for movement counters, by the way, if you've watched my playthroughs, you've seen this. I use a CVP counter. I just change the label to movement factor MP, and I just use this to keep track of my moves. So say that they were at 10 moves. Now the Jeep here that I'm using has 37 moves, so they got plenty of move. And as we said, this vehicle is destroyed. Now, if they want to carry on moving, that's perfectly fine. They would have to move the lead convoy first for the remainder of its move. So we go 2 more, so that would be 12, 14, etc. Assuming I want to stop there, I now would carry on with my rear convoy. So they would move 12, they would move 14, they would move 16, etc. All right. So they're treated separately as different convoys. You just move the lead one until you're done moving, and then you go back to the rear convoy. And again, if the rear convoy, once more, this vehicle here were destroyed, and there were more vehicles daisy chained behind that one, you would again break up into 2 more convoys, and so forth. All right. At any point, if you have 1 vehicle left in a convoy, it is no longer that. Just remember that. Now, there are some limitations with convoys. You cannot do overruns. So if we had a whole whack load of tanks, say we have some of these A9s, and you have, for whatever reason, we have a German infantry sitting in the middle of the road, you're not allowed to do any kind of overrun. All right. You're just not able to. You're not allowed to use any kind of reverse movement. So if we were to place a roadblock, say we put a roadblock here, and our convoy is moving merrily down the road, and we don't know it. Now we see a roadblock all of a sudden. We are not able to use reverse movement to go around it. We have to negotiate some other route. You cannot stop and use reverse movement. You can just picture that. If this whole convoy were to stop in place and try and back up, it turned into a mess. If any of you have ever driven a military convoy, you know exactly what's going to happen. So you would not be able to reverse a convoy. And finally, you're not able to gain motion status as part of a convoy. So here we have a hip gun. If this gun appeared and for whatever reason you decided to stop and you want to try and attempt motion status, like you want to gain that +2 motion benefit, you would not be able to. You're just not able to do that as a convoy. So this is not the same as starting your motors at the beginning of your movement phase. This is when you're about to be shot by a tank. Say this is a German tank. This would probably be a better example. Let's bring in a Mark III. Right, a Mark III shows up in our rear, all of a sudden, comes around the tree line, and now we're dead in the water because we're stopped for whatever reason, and we want to gain motion status. We cannot. All right, as part of a convoy, you cannot attempt motion status. What else is there? You cannot re-enter a hex that you've entered in the movement phase. All right, so we have a roadblock, so now we're going to spend a move to stop. Now we're kind of screwed. We cannot turn around and re-enter our hex to go back the way we came. All we can do is maybe turn around sideways and enter a new hex. But you cannot re-enter the hex that you just departed in the same movement phase. So if this was the end of our movement phase in our next player turn, we could then re-enter that hex. It's just in the same movement phase. You're not allowed to enter that same location. All right, now, finally, when it comes to wrecks and or other vehicles, if you want to enter that location, it's going to count double. Now, normally, when it comes to a wreck on a road, you're already paying 3 points. All right, a wreck in a field normally costs you 1 extra. So if you have a tank, for example, that drives into a wreck in a field, you're paying 2 movement points. All right, open ground is 1. If there's a wreck, you pay 2. When a wreck is on a road, there's actually a 3rd movement point that you expend. So for a convoy, it's actually going to become 6. All right. So this Jeep here would be paying 6 move to enter this location. So everybody would pay 6. Suddenly we're up to 22. Then he comes off. This guy here would pay another 6, so now we're up to 28. Not counting for any turns I would have to do. And then he comes off. This guy would have to pay another 6. Up to 34 all of a sudden. And everybody comes off, except I would not be able to, because this guy would not be able to afford the cost because he only has 37. He would be at, he'd have to do excessive speed to get off onto the wreck. So just remember that wrecks on roads increase your movement points, and whenever you enter a vehicle or a wreck location, it costs double your movement points to enter that location. Yeah, so that's some of the detriments to being in a convoy. All right, so if you want to ever leave a convoy, there's only 3 cases that you must meet one of these in order to do so. These are the only 3 conditions, and you must declare this before you begin your impulse. So if you're in the middle of an impulse, you can't just suddenly declare it. You have to say, I'm going to do non-convoy movement before you start moving your units. Now, at the end of your previous impulse, any defensive first fire must occur. It has to all be resolved. Then you can announce your intent to do non-convoy movement. Then you conduct it, and then you do the rest of your impulse for the remaining parts of your convoy. So the 3 cases are if the vehicle you want to move or your passenger, rider, crew currently has LOS to a known enemy unit, and again, in this case, let's unhip these guys here. A concealed unit is not known, remember that, so it has to be a known enemy unit, right? You have to have LOS to it. So if we have this guy here, let's unhip these. All right, so you need to have LOS to a known enemy unit, or a convoy vehicle. Any other vehicle has to have been attacked by a enemy that has either immobilized it or eliminated it. So again, if we have our AT gun here that's destroyed this vehicle, say, or mobilized it, then any vehicle that is in the convoy is able to gain freedom of movement, to use non-convoy movement. And this includes minefields as well. So if we have a minefield, let's bring in a minefield. We'll just use an AP minefield here. Say there's an AP minefield here, and it's only at firepower 6. We have a Jeep, so it's unarmored, and we would roll on our table here. Let's do a resolve roll. That's pretty shit. So in this case, that is not going to affect the Jeep, and therefore it would not count for purposes of non-convoy movement. It has to either immobilize or eliminate the vehicle in order to count. So in this case, we would not be able to disband. We would have to keep moving. We could choose to stop. We don't have to keep moving. But normally we would keep moving for depending on your objectives, and then the next vehicle would enter it, that location, do another roll, and if it isn't an eliminate or immobilize, then we just keep moving. All right, and then the third case is if you have an AIV that has a radio, and there is another non-shocked, non-stunned AIV with a radio that does have LOS to a known enemy unit. That would be another condition that lets you gain freedom of movement as well. And then the last case is if you're subject to recall. So should you've been attacked by a sniper, for example, your crew exposed and you're an AFV and you're under recall, or half track, for example, then of course you have freedom of movement because you have to exit the playing field. So that's your three cases when you can leave convoy and start your independent movement. At any point that you leave the convoy to do your non-convoy movement, you must finish that movement first before the convoy's impulse movement begins. All right, so in this particular case, let's assume that this AT gun managed to destroy the lead convoy, lead vehicle in the convoy. Or actually, let's leave it immobilized. All right, so for whatever reason, the 75 long was only able to mobilize a Jeep, just a shit shot. And therefore, it is not destroyed. Now these vehicles here will have freedom of movement to keep going, or they can do whatever they want. Regarding radialess AFV platoons, you must move as a single entity, obviously. If you want to move as an individual AFV in a radialess AFV platoon, you must do that the minute you leave the convoy. Once that platoon leaves the convoy, you cannot then move independently of your platoon. All right, so your individual AFV must move independently of the platoon prior to that platoon leaving. Once that platoon leaves again, it must stay as a whole. Subsequent turns, you can then attempt to leave the platoon, but until that time, you must leave prior to the platoon leaving after passing that normal task check. Recall forces you to leave the convoy as soon as possible at the start of the next impulse. So again, if you are, say, 10 movement points into your 30 movement point drive and you get recalled for whatever reason, before the next impulse is carried out, you do your independent movement to get off the board using whatever move you have left. You can also create a new convoy, again, provided one of those three non-convoy movement point factors are taken into account. By expending a stop, that creates a gap, and then you can create a new convoy. All right, so you still have to use one of those three cases to create the new convoy, but you can basically create a gap, assuming you don't want to maybe advance into some kill zone. Create a gap, let the lead convoy gain some distance. Maybe you can take a different route and avoid being shot up. Any MPs that you've expended up to that point, you still have used up. However, whatever the lead convoy uses do not apply to you. It's just what you've used up to the point that the gap has been created and the new convoy has been formed. Now, you can also join up. So again, if we have, say, 2 more vehicles in another convoy coming up behind, for whatever reason, this convoy here has not moved yet. In this movement phase, this convoy joins up with them, ends their movement phase. At the start of the next player turn, all 5 vehicles will now form a single convoy. So you can always join up convoys. You cannot create a convoy out of non-convoy units in the course of a game, but you can combine 2 or more convoys into a single one. And any movement points that have been expended so far will then apply. So if you've used up, for example, we have 37 movement points for the Jeeps. Say we've used up 20. This convoy can now continue on moving, having used up 20 movement points. So you'd use 1 more to start up, 21. And now we can carry on with another 16 movement points for the rest of the move. All right. Finally, we got some miscellaneous points to cover. This one kind of baffles me. I don't know why they did this, But for whatever reason, troop capacity in a convoy is 0. So you could have a couple of Opal Blitzes, with their 29 portage point capacity. You carry 0 troops. I don't know why. The exception to that is if you're towing a gun, you can carry a crew and its ammunition for the gun. I don't know why that is. It's just one of those weird things with squad leader. I don't know why that's the case, but that's the way it is. You cannot carry any units. Tanks can't carry riders. Half tracks cannot carry squads. You can have 0 capacity. The only exception is trucks towing ordnance can carry the crew. You do not have any hindrance modifiers when it comes to Case J. Now, Case J is moving vehicles. If we look at the ordnance to hit, anytime Case J applies, moving vehicle, defensive fire versus, you do not get any hindrance modifiers. So if this gun was in this building, for example, and it wanted to target this vehicle here, none of these vehicles in the way would ever count for hindrance. Moving vehicles don't count anyways. But assuming these guys were all stopped, maybe this guy here was in motion for whatever reason, convoy vehicles do not cause hindrance modifiers as long as Case J applies to your target. Column is basically applies to infantry, wagons, and cavalry. So your ground units, right? It's got to be a contiguous set of 2 or more hexes, 1 hex wide. So it's got to be in this formation. And normal stack and rules apply. Obviously, you can't overstack. Now, all units in a column must remain adjacent, and you must remain adjacent to the same units that you started with. So in the course of your move, you basically can't shift units around. This stack here must always remain adjacent to this stack and this stack, regardless of how you move around. You can only ever be adjacent to these two. You can't end up adjacent to the back column, for example. I'm not sure how that would happen, but whatever case, you must always remain adjacent to those two in the course of your move. You can only ever enter the hex that the unit in front of you has exited. All right, so there's no backtracking. You can only exit or enter the hex that the unit in front of you has exited. The only activity you're allowed to do is moving, advancing, so in the advance phase. You can gain concealment and loss as a group. Now, when it comes to gaining concealment, you can't actually do that, but you can lose it as a stack. You just can't gain it. And disbanding, of course. So once the column is disbanded, everybody's disbanded. No, you don't just disband part of it. Any support weapons that you carry must be dismantled if possible. In this case, the British are carrying LMGs and Piats, so there's no dismantled weapons. The exception to dismantled weapons is wagons. If you have wagons, you can carry your weapons assembled. And you use impulse movement, much like with convoys. Now, a real benefit to column is that you can use gallop if you're cavalry, double time, road bonus, and leader bonus, and they all stack. So here we have a 9-2. We are on a road because remember the train carries on off board. So we could CX on a road with leader bonus, which means this entire stack on a road would get 9 move. I should say not stack. This entire column gets 9 moves. So this guy here would go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 with the road bonus. Everybody else is moving up behind him. Very powerful, very efficient, very fast. However, it's very vulnerable, as we're about to see. Detriments. You are always vulnerable because you're using hazardous movement. Picture it, you have a bunch of guys trucking down the road, and you're always going to be at a -2 for hazardous movement. Now, on the plus side, well, if you can call it that, you're not subject to moving in open and non-assault move, but it's the same thing, it's -2. You cannot use minimum move, assault move, dash, bypass, or human wave, obviously, or armored assault. You cannot take advantage of shell holes or entrenchments. And you cannot enter locations like woods or buildings unless you're using roads or paths. Now, if you're in the process of, let's assume this guy here is hip, so let's conceal him, and then we'll make him hip. Say in the process of entering in this location, you guys are all like this. We enter this location, we do our impulse. The minute we enter this location, this guy has to unhip, he has to reveal himself. We temporarily show ourselves we're a real unit. We go, oh shit. These guys get bounced back once I move them properly. I am in trouble now because I am now overstacked and I'm unconcealed. Overstacked, and I'm going to fire because why wouldn't I? I'm going to get an 8 firepower attack, down 3, which is pretty well death to the British. It is only the unit that is moving into the enemy's location. It gets bounced back, obviously, but it is very real potential to cause overstack depending on how your column is set up. Now, this scenario that I'm going to be playing, it's AR1 broken column. Again, Steve and I are going to be playing this probably next weekend. And every German unit is going to be setting up hip. So I have no idea where the enemy is. All I'm going to have is, well, this actually be a squad. I'm going to attempt to deploy when I start the scenario. So I'm going to have basically 4 half squads. I'm going to try and scout as much as possible. Hopefully I can reveal shit. But I'm not going to know where he's going to set up. So this might happen. And I got to be careful of my this situation right here, because I could run into his squad, and if that happens, again, 8 down 3 is going to be, yeah, yeah. So, what's a 3 on the 8? K2, yeah. It's going to be death if I do this kind of situation. So I got to be wary of that. But just bear in mind that when you bump into an enemy and you get pushed back, bounce back, you're going to be susceptible to possibly overstacking when you're in this kind of formation. So it is one of the detriments to being in a column. Yes, you get the road bonus. Yes, you get the leader bonus. It's great for movement, but if you have danger, close enemy like this, it could be definitely to your detriment. All right, so that being said, let's move on. If you have other units, say we have a unit in this house and he wants to join the column. In his advanced phase, let's say he jumps onto the road. Now he's part of this column. In the subsequent player turn, he can now join the column because he's good order, and we can gain all the benefits of the column. He'll get the leader bonus, he'll get the road bonus because he starts on the road. If he started in the house, this column here would not get the road bonus. They would only get the normal leadership bonus. So just bear that in mind. If he wants the road bonus, he would have to start in the road. Again, much like with a convoy, this unit here would have to forgo their movement phase and allow this guy to join. All right, so these guys would have to forgo their movement phase so this guy can join up with them. And much like a convoy, gaps cannot appear in the column. They must make every attempt to keep their cohesion as best possible. Now, when it comes to disbandment, there's rules, as always, much like with a convoy. So, what are they? If you are attacked, if any unit in the column is attacked, even by a sniper, you can disband. For minefields, so again, if we have a minefield attack and it pins or breaks or reduces, eliminates or immobilizes a vehicle, say you have a vehicle with you, or I should say a wagon or a motorcycle, then you can disband the column. If you reveal a wire, one of your units enters a location and there's wire, assuming that's an orchard. Where's an orchard? Oh, there's none. Let's put them in here. You stumble onto concealment terrain. Oh, there's one. Okay. We reveal a wire, and you jump on that, and all of a sudden it's like crap. Now you can disband and carry on. If you have LOS to a ground unit, okay, this guy on hips reveals himself. He starts to shoot. The column can disband. During the movement phase, after any defensive first fire has been conducted against it, all attacker and defender columns can check for disbandment. So if both sides have columns for whatever reason, the minute that condition is met, they can check for disbandment, right? So both sides could. Now, there is a caveat to that, of course. We'll cover that in a second. And any other phase, including close combat and the rout phase. So the minute you start expending move, you can check to see if you meet the prerequisite, known enemy units, etc., to disband. So if you're advancing, can I see him? Yes, disband, as you will, right? So some of the the weird things, if you're a defender and it's the attacker's player turn, and you meet the requisite for disbanding, you're going to become pinned. All right, so just for the player turn, you're going to become pinned, so you can't do anything. Well, you're going to be impacted for your fire, for example, but unless you're immune to pin results, fanaticism, what have you, or you're in a wagon. If you enter the map concealed, as you normally do, and you lose it, you will not be able to gain concealment again as long as you're in column, regardless of LOS. So if you're behind a hill, a wooded hill, yeah, there's no enemy on the board, you still cannot gain concealment as long as you're in column. At night, only the lead vehicle or unit has to roll for straying, and everybody behind that lead person only has to will follow the lead. All right. If you haven't ever done night patrolling, it's always kind of comical. All you're watching is a couple of illuminated cat's eyes of the guy's helmet or his bush hat, and you're basically following a couple of cat's eyes in the dark. It's kind of comical sometimes. But yeah, the lead unit is the only one that has to worry about straying, and everybody else is just going to follow behind that guy wherever that guy takes him. If you have partial entry of a unit, say for example, this is not a legal setup for this guy because he has to be on this board, and this is a partial board. But say for example, this guy on hips here, and he decides to unload because he's got a nice juicy target on these guys here, and say he impacts the leader here. We'll even break him just for shits and giggles. And the column now disbands. These guys here, these three here have the option of entering as column, or they could enter in normally on subsequent turns. All right, so they have a choice. They can either come in as a column, or they could come in set up normally and come in on subsequent turns. All right, so if columns disband and you have only partial entry, the units that are still off board can set up as normal, or they can enter with column or convoy. All right, so that was just a quick tutorial on convoys and columns. Again, not a lot of use, not a lot of scenarios, as I said, 20, 24 maybe, that are out there. Maybe be more coming, who knows. It's for setup and entry purposes typically. Maybe a handful will see that as a victory condition, or you exit as a convoy, but it's not very popular, I guess, because it's just a means of delivery to the battlefield. And again, ASL is about the action in between units, not so much to travel to. So hopefully you found this insightful, and I'd like to know what you thought of it. I'd also like to know what other chapters and sections you want to see tutorials on. It's quite a large rule book, and there's a lot of chapters, a lot of sections, and sometimes some of the rules need clarification, and I'd like to know what you would like to see. So if you have any queries or problem chapters, by all means comment down below. Let me know what you want to see, and we'll see you guys next video. Bye-bye.